And we're live. It is Friday. It is the 18th of July, which is to say 4 days after Bastille Day. We're still recovering from the Bastille Day revelries. It is 8 o'clock a.m. It is the year of our Lord 2025. And the other day I spent some time celebrating a guest of extraordinary excellence, Emily Hogue, who was committed enough to the bit to not merely wear a dog shirt, but to um, uh, spend active time, choosing the right dog shirt for her to appear in and doing it over some significant anti-dog shirt pressure from her household, which is one of the DC hotbeds of anti-dog shirt sentiment. But little did I know that we would be, that Emily, I don't know if eclipsed is the right word, the same week, but that we would have a guest that has his own cactus. And I understand that Holly's got to be in her bonnet about whether the cactus is really the actual cactus actual, or whether he is some imposter that has feigned resurrection in order to start a cult. But there is no doubt that Chris's cactus is the real deal, that it's its own thing. It's not, not an imposter. And we are going to discuss the other cactus today. But first, I just should point out that in DC, the sun is not shining, though the birds are chirping. It's going to be a great freaking day. I'm going to spend it in court. And whoops, no, wrong answer.
In morning television.
So can your cactus do that? Wait,
Chris,
you gotta
program it
unmute.
yet.
You gotta unmute.
Chris, you're muted.
Oh, Chris.
Sorry, I'm muted, amateur. So it makes this sound at the moment because I haven't programmed it.
Well, can you get it to say? Can you program it to say you're watching Dog Shirt TV, a fucking revolution in morning television?
I could.
I think
How
you
do
should
you
be
do
programming
that?
it for something Reformation-y, given everything you said yesterday.
The resurrection, yes.
Well, look, I'm going to leave this as it is. Look, you are watching Dog Shirt TV. It is a freaking revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features is that every now and then we have a guest on who just happens to have his own cactus. It wasn't planned. Chris did not acquire the cactus because he was coming on Dog Shirt TV. He really just happens to have his own cactus. And another one of the revolutionary features, and as I often say, there are quite a number of them, is that every now and then we listen to a podcast and we say, wow, that podcast has a lot of connective tissue with the in lieu of fun / Dog Shirt TV / Lawfare Greater Cinematic Universe. And we should get to know these people. And Alicia happens to be going to the UK and happens to be sitting down with one of them and comes back and says, not only is he pretty cool and he knows a lot, but he has his own cactus and he watches Dog Shirt TV. And we say to each other, we should really have them on. And so we do. And look, folks, we are not allowed to have fun anymore. But we are allowed to have Matt Fulton and Chris.
Carr.
What is your other Carr?
You can't see it for the cactus. He's got it hidden.
It's blurring your name. of the Secrets and Spies podcast, 3 episodes of which I listened to last night. And guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Great to be here. Yeah, thanks for having us.
So let's start. Let's deal with the cactus stuff get it out of the way right away. How did you come to have a cactus that looks so much like the cactus? And is yours a former directorate of operations person whose activities cannot really be discussed?
Well, it could well be a spy. It's been sitting in my kitchen for about 3 years now.
Recording things.
Probably, yes, without me knowing.
Which is, we know they're capable of recording everything you say.
I had no idea until I watched Dogshit that it could do that. It's just sort of sat there, kind of looking pretty in the kitchen in the corner, and it was a gift from my sister. So it originally comes from Exeter, which is what is that? Sort of southwest from here. So it's had a bit of a journey to my flat in London, but I haven't yet figured out how to program it to do exciting stuff. So I'll have to do that.
Well, you should get it to do the intro to Secrets and Spies.
Should.
I think I have heard the production values of Secrets and Spies on that intro, and I understand that it is produced by you. So you're clearly like much better at this than we are, and I think what's missing is just direct cactus involvement.
True, I think so. It needs to have a deep American voice somehow, though, just to kind of stay on the Secrets and Spies brand.
Yeah, although I think, one of the things about the cactus way of talking is that it blurs out all accents. It's it's just kind of whatever goes in, what comes out is a preposterous thing sounding like this. So, Matt, get us started. Tell us about Secrets and Spies. It's like 9 seasons in. How long have you guys been doing this?
Yeah, well, this is it's been a long journey. Yeah, we're almost wrapping up our 9th season, starting our 10th. My involvement has been a lot shorter than 9 years. I think Chris, I'm going up on what, 3 now? 3 years with you now?
At least it was 2022 you came on, yeah.
Yeah. So I will if we want to go way back into the origin story, I will pivot to Chris, and then my involvement comes in a bit later in the story.
All right, so Chris, how did this get started?
Okay, well, I made a film called The Dry Cleaner, which is a kind of contemporary set spy drama about dry cleaning. So if anybody doesn't know what dry cleaning is, it's a technique used by intelligence officers to detect if they're being followed by hostile intelligence. And so you go through a process of dry cleaning before meeting your source. And so I made a film about that, and I was sitting just on a lot of research from nerding out on spy stuff, listening to like the Spy Museum podcast on a loop for like 2 years and reading loads of books and things. And I've always enjoyed podcasts. I listened to a guy called Bob Sesker and the Bob Sesker Show, and I think apart from wanting to be a filmmaker, I kind of secretly wanted to be a radio host. I was a big fan of a TV show called Midnight Caller, where the DJ would like solve crimes and stuff. So somewhere in my subconscious, I've taken that, and we're now solving espionage mysteries, etc. So Secrets and Spies originally was called the Dry Cleaner Cast. And but that was such an obscure name, and nobody really was clicking with it. I had this sort of revelation over COVID to make it a bit more do what it says on the tin. So we renamed it Secrets and Spies, and suddenly our listenership sort of jumped up. And it was originally sort of very focused on the war on terror, but as Russian aggression became less academic and more real world, we started to shift our focus a little bit, and so and so it's sort of become my gateway into sort of understanding world events. And then Matt joined me in 2022, and I'll let Matt explain his half of the story.
Yeah, so Matt, how did you cross the Atlantic to get involved in the booming industry of espionage podcasts?
Yeah, I mean, so I was I had been studying intelligence, counterterrorism, geopolitics, that field for years. It's just a observer. I wrote a spy novel years ago. Been working on the second and the rest of the series in different iterations for many years. That's a 800-pound gorilla on my back. Different episode, that one. But was we Chris and I knew each other from Twitter back in the before times when we were on Twitter, and yeah, he approached me. I'm not quite sure what even the context was really, but sort of approached me and was like, "Hey, I've been thinking about doing a once a month episode, where we just sort of like bullshit about like the geopolitical events of the day." I think he was sort of,
These are
going
the espresso martini
right,
episode. Yeah.
right, going for sort of like this transatlantic sort of like context, and the espresso martini name that was Chris's idea, but sort of came from, I guess, the joke that when we record, I'm still, and you can hear it in some of the episodes, I'm still sort of waking up, but Chris is kind of ready for happy hour.
Oh
So
yeah, Nastya and I do something very similar to this when she does the show. We call it Cave et Vino,
yeah,
which is coffee and wine, um, and um, and yeah, and for the same reason, I'm drinking my morning coffee and she's having an afternoon glass of wine.
yeah. Yeah, so it's my involvement kind of grew pretty naturally from there. We started doing espresso martini twice a month, and eventually started doing my own interviews and stuff. And now it's kind of a pretty solid 50-50 endeavor. I'm happy to be doing it. It's not anything I had ever planned to do, or just sort of happened.
So one of the things I got from the espresso martini episode that I listened to is that you both actually know a lot of shit, which is
We try.
no, I'm not like I'm not saying that as
Thanks.
I mean
Do I
the
need to
amount
referee
of,
this conversation, Ben?
what's that?
Do I need to ref this conversation?
No, that was just it was just an observation of like
It's the
w-
cactus
w-
competition. I'm sure it's coming
we're
through.
talk No, it's not. That was a nice thing to say that they know stuff. That's like a lot of people spend a lot of time talking about intelligence policy and operations and stuff who just fill in a lot of gaps of what they don't know with what they assume must be true, and that's uh, a big space for. But for example, Matt did a little bit of a lecture the other day on war powers stuff, and he led with uh, everything he doesn't know on the subject and warned everybody, and then proceeded to give a quite uh, I would say, fulsome account of the separation of powers, resort to force debate between the executive branch and Congress over a long period of time. And so I'm just interested in, as somebody who is also entirely self-educated in this space and has no formal background. I like, you know, how did you guys come to be like what is your background in the intelligence law and geopolitics space? That's for both of you in whatever
Yeah,
order.
yeah.
Chris,
I'll
you
let.
wanna take that one first, and then I'll jump in.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's is it a background? It's more of an origin story than a background. So you guys have all heard of Oleg Gordievsky?
I love this story.
So when I was a wee boy, a teenager, living in a little town called Godalming, I was about 16, 17, and I was working part-time at my local supermarket called Waitrose, which is quite a middle-class
Very
supermarket. And I
fancy
was
one,
on a
actually.
It is, yeah, and I had a very unfancy job of working on the meat and fish department, so I learned a lot about filleting fish, etc. And in this supermarket, there was a familiar face, and I could have recognised him from a TV show on Channel 4 called Wanted, where members of the public would go on the run, and professional trackers would hunt them down. And he was a sort of technical advisor. So I recognized his face, but I just couldn't place his name. I knew he was a spy, but I didn't really know his name. And it took a little while before I plucked up the courage. And it was actually a documentary on the BBC that finally gave me his name, Oleg Gordievsky. So I kind of meekly went up to him one day and said, "Excuse me, sir, are you Oleg Gordievsky from the KGB?" And he was like, "Yes, I am." And we had a very brief conversation because I didn't want to get fired for harassing a customer at the supermarket and outing him as a
Not
KGB
least
spy.
for confronting a KGB officer.
Exactly. But he did recommend, like all good spies, to get a copy of his book, Next Stop Execution, which I did, and it's this very copy. It changed everything I knew about spying, because a lot of my references as a teenager up to that point were James Bond, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., a little bit of Mission Impossible, actually, it was around then. Obviously it's all about people going undercover, breaking into things, etc. But when I read that book, you realise actually spying is much more of a people business, and it's usually down to two people in a room covertly talking about something. And the big revelation was that obviously the MI6 officer is not the one who actually does the spying. They're the ones who actually cultivate this relationship and recruit someone to do the dangerous work, which would be, in Oleg's case, it'd be Oleg Gordievsky, who sort of turned on the KGB because he was upset with Russia cracking down on the Prague Spring in 1968, I believe it was, when he was stationed in Copenhagen. So he was so disgusted by it. And I'm sure with what's been going on in Ukraine, there's probably a lot of new Oleg Gordievskys out there that we don't know about. I hope there are. And maybe one day I'll meet them in Waitrose, so that's
No,
kind of
I mean, just to give you an idea of this, I've mentioned this on the show before. The FBI in Washington has been buying extreme geofenced Facebook and Twitter back when Twitter was, a thing. Ads around geofence to the Russian embassy complex that say things like full mobilization is very hard on families. We want to talk to you, and has a signal number, and nicely produced videos of people going from the embassy, taking the metro to the Washington field office. The recruitment here is, I mean, it's not overt, but it's so close to overt. And the FBI wouldn't be doing this just to troll the Russian embassy. They're doing, although it is an epic troll, they're doing it because they're recruiting people.
Yeah, indeed. So I'm hoping that there's a lot of new sources out there. And I will just quickly say, Alicia, I love your KGB t-shirt. It's very cool.
I didn't even say anything. I try to match the shirt with the show.
I have 42 minutes left.
Yeah, I have to run to Ottawa. So no, I got this in Tbilisi. There's a cafe in Tbilisi called KGB. I don't know if it's still operating, but it was as of like 2015. So that tells you how old the shirt collection is.
Do they specialize in tea?
They have tea, they have Russian food, and they take the piss out of, well, the KGB, obviously, and
Nice.
Russian
So
domination.
how about you, Matt? How did you get into this field and come to know about war powers and all the stuff that you seem to be actually knowledgeable about?
Well, thank you for that. That means a lot coming for you. That conversation that we had was sort of born from some listener questions that we got. Well, what about the war power stuff? And I'm like, well, I am very much not a lawyer, but here's sort of what I do know and the stuff that I don't. By the way, Lawfare has published reams of stuff on this. Go read that. But so thank you for that. But no, so my as is true for most folks of my generation, the war on terror was sort of like the background noise to my adolescence. I was in sixth grade on 9/11, remember vividly all the kids in my class sort of getting picked up one by one and not really knowing what was going on. When the Iraq War started, I faked being sick for a week so I could stay home and watch David Bloom of NBC News embedded with the 3rd Infantry Division on the highway to Baghdad. Went to Catholic University originally in D.C., studying IR counterterrorism. Wanted to be an analyst in the IC somewhere. I was outside. I was in the crowd outside the White House on the night Bin Laden was killed. So it was just sort of that. Yeah, that world was just sort of fundamental to my upbringing. And years, decades now at this point of just reading. I wanted and still do. I'm working on it. I emailed with Tom Clancy a bit back and forth when I was in middle school, just sort of by chance found his email in a forum somewhere. He was talking about being visited by the FBI for his research for Cardinal of the Kremlin, and I found that email and reached out to him, and we talked for a bit. So still want to write in the genre, working on that. But yeah, I mean, to your point, no real formal training, no actual job experience in the IC or in the national security community. Just a lot of books, a lot of thinking, a lot of observation, and it just accumulates over the year. And I think
proving once again that all good education is self-education, which people continue a lesson that people continue to not internalize and understand. But boy, oh boy, is it true. Alicia, since you have to go in 9 minutes, I'm going to turn things over to you for the next few minutes to make sure you have opportunity to get your questions in.
Well, I mean, I really just wanted to make today fun, even though there's like the world is burning in the background, and it would be remiss of us not to mention the whole CBS debacle and the banana card. I guess you're calling it the banana card? I don't
We
know.
don't have to call it banana anymore because it has now been published. We can say that the Wall Street Journal has now published the birthday greeting. Apparently, was part of a book. I didn't know that part.
I'm going to see the rest
That
of the book.
Donald Trump sent to Jeffrey Epstein. We had to call it banana yesterday because it hadn't been published, and we didn't want to get ahead of the public record. But now we can just say, I don't know, the P2P, pedophile to pedophile, uh, um, birthday greeting.
Yeah, so that's happening. And I thought it would be more fun to talk about fiction. And
I agree.
and your guys' opinion. That was horrible English. Your opinion, gentlemen, on what makes for the best and worst fiction in covering the intel community. That would be my first question. I've got many.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll let Matt kick off first because he's very opinionated on this, and yeah.
Bit. This is we've ranted about this more than once on the podcast. I think there's a fine line here, and I think at the end of the day, spy fiction is supposed to be entertainment still. People pick it up and they read it to learn something, yes, but also to be entertained, and that's important. And there's always been these two. The genre has been sort of this wide spectrum, and a lot of writers and frequent readers and stuff in the genre will cite, on one side you have like the Ian Fleming James Bond side, which is more elevated, action oriented, can be a bit stray from real life. And then at the far end of that spectrum you have the John le Carres, the real kind of like hard boiled, this is really kind of like how it is. And in a way I think this is more an American part of the subgenre, but like the Tom Clancy techno thrillers that get to varying degrees of technical and geopolitical detail and everything. So it ranges wildly. I think my view, and again Chris and I have talked about this on the show, is for a lot of people, when they read a spy novel or they watch a spy movie or a TV show or something, that is the most concentrated view of that world that they will ever get, right? And so, for that reason, I think it is incumbent upon writers and producers and directors in this genre to try to portray the world how it actually is. I think if all you ever see in your depictions of this world is that, one really awesome badass with a Glock and some C4 and a boss who's willing to throw out all the rules to get the job done can solve.
And superhuman physical abilities.
Yes. Women love him. Men want to be him. Yeah, right. That
I've never met an operator like that, by the way.
Neither have I. Not yet.
That's not a thing.
That they can solve any complex geopolitical issue. That is not reality. And I think if that is all people see, and they sort of get the perspective that well, why can't we just solve the cartels? Why can't we just solve the Iranian nuclear program like real quick? I think that gets to be very kind of dangerous. There's also quite a deep conspiratorial kind of bent to the genre at times, which I think also plays into, some of it is, there is a kernel of truth to a lot of this stuff, of course, but it gets to the depiction that, the CIA, the intelligence community, MI6, they're either all knowing and all powerful and evil, or they're a bunch of incompetent buffoons, and I feel like when the depictions are only that, it actively damages people's perspective of what is possible in international relations and how it actually works. So,
can I ask you about that? So it seems to me that one of the big flaws of intelligence fiction is that it is almost all focused on special operations, which is a tiny piece.
And not really intelligence gathering.
Exactly. It's a tiny fraction of what they do, and it's actually a category that's, a little bit separated from, intelligence operations, but the covert action space. And then number two, on the acquisition side of intelligence. But if you look at the CIA or any big human intelligence component, an enormous percentage of what they're doing, 75-80% of the personnel are devoted to analysis. They're people like Holly Berkeley Fletcher, our frequent co-host, who are, processing information that is brought in both from open sources and from covert sources, but they're not, swashbuckling, cactus types who are out there getting the material. And I cannot think of a good movie or book about the analysis process. The only one, famously 3 Days of the Condor, purports to be about an intelligence analyst, but he becomes operational in the first couple of scenes and spends the rest of the movie being, Robert Redford and going around shooting people. And it seems to me that the great missing thing, there are analysts who are depicted in the Smiley and Le Carré novels, but they're not, the main character is still an operations guy. It seems to me the big missing portrait is of the analysis process. And so, Chris, you're a filmmaker. We all know why this is, which is guns are more exciting than, drawing lines between, between pins on a board. Why can't anybody figure out a way to make analysis interesting?
It's a good question. I think multiple things really. I think number one, that would work better as a TV series, like a mini series. And I think like the French show Le Bureau is pretty. I mean, it is, again, it's operational. It's not
Right, but then
analysis.
they,
But,
you know, there are
mm,
analytic scenes in it. It's a great show, but then
it
at
is.
the end of the day, they're out there shooting people and
Yeah,
pretending to defect, and it gets pretty ridiculous in
it does.
spots.
It does. Yeah, indeed, indeed. And there's another show I love called the Sandbaggers, which is an English show that very few people seem to know about. It doesn't get the love that Le Carre's material does. And I think part of it, there's a lot of pressures in the film and TV industry, and a lot of producers don't really care about authenticity. They're more interested in just entertaining people, and this is where lots of liberties get taken, and there are different degrees of liberties because there's a remake of Le Bureau, the American one, which I've only watched a bit of, and it's already made some choices that don't make sense. Like Eve and I talk about this. So in Le Bureau, the main character's sort of the woman he sort of becomes obsessed with is, I believe she was Syrian with an Iranian connection, and that makes a lot of sense with the intelligence story. But in the new one, they've made her Ethiopian, which then makes no sense with the whole Iranian connection. It's little things like that where big details go missing, and I think sadly a lot of writers in the spy space are not spy nerds. Quite a few writers, like if you look at what happened with the Jack Ryan show, I thought that because Jack Ryan, the character's got everything that you just talked about in the books, Ben, and yet in the TV show they just turn him into an action man in the end, and I think, and I look at the production team behind it, and I feel like there are quite a few people in there who weren't really spy nerds or overly knowledgeable. There was one producer, I think, connected to Homeland, but even Homeland, I felt after the first series kind of fell off the wheel and got very silly. I think if anything, it was the second series when the guy stabbed someone through the hand. For me, was where it jumped the shark and really kind of shat the bed, so to speak. So yeah, the problem is it's just not very. It's difficult to capture that on screen in a compelling way, and I think you need to create a miniseries that is just purely about the that world of analytics and stuff, and build it on the kind of the character side of it. So somebody described working at the CIA as being a bit like in The Office. I can't remember who told me that, but somebody said that The Office is actually quite popular among CIA staff, because you've got always different personalities. And I think if you made an office-based CIA show that's about kind of crazy personalities, it could work well. And another show, and I'll just quickly plug in another podcast I run. So there's a TV show in the 90s called Homicide: Life on the Street. I don't know if any of you guys have seen this show. And
Great
yeah,
show.
yes,
One of
yeah.
the great all-time shows.
Yeah, and it's all very character based. You get these kind of character quirks, and I think if anything, if you took that model with the way they use the police characters and bring that to the spy genre, you could have potentially a very interesting show where it's more about the personalities and less about the action. And certainly the first few seasons of Homicide were like that. So the reason I bring it up, I run a podcast about Homicide called Homicide: Life on the Set, where we interviewed a cast and crew of that show. So another plug there.
Excellent.
A quick
Alicia.
question. Yeah, I've got a quick question for both of you guys, and then I apologize for having to escape to my capital. I'm going to do it differently for each of you. Chris, if you could turn any either fictional or actual historic intel story into a movie or TV series, what would it be? And for you, Matt, it would be writing about it. Let's just give you historical, not fake. If you were to turn it into fiction.
Matt, do you want to go first? Or?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
what historical event would I like to turn
Yeah.
into fiction? Yeah. Okay. So I've had such a project in my future projects list for a long time. I would love to do a prestige TV, Sunday 9 p.m. slot mini series on the Bay of Pigs invasion. I think that would be awesome if done right. With do the research, do the production design, get it right. I think that could be really cool.
Yeah, for me, obviously it'd be Oleg Gordievsky. I think the way I would do it would be a mini series with multiple timelines. So you've got Oleg when he wants to first become a spy, but then you've also got Oleg 20 years later where he's now been exposed and trying to get out of Russia. And you could even probably go into the Aldrich Ames story, because there's always something really interesting about Aldrich Ames and his turning and it betraying Oleg. I've always found it quite interesting because they both actually meet each other, spoiler alert, at the CIA headquarters like 2 years later, and that's the ending of the show for me, is when they meet each other. But anyway.
That's cool. I was advocating, Ben, by the way, in a off camera conversation with Chris, that he should take on the Volunteer,
Oh,
which would be
Interesting.
really depressing and dark, and also a little bit of Stella Remington. I feel like she should be dramatized. Maybe not her career, but
I
her books.
I think the the if you want a great piece of analytic counterintelligence, the exposure of Aldrich Ames, and which we know a great deal about, the stuff that was missed along the way in his career, the alcoholism, the spendthrift character, the fact that he was, hanging out there as an obvious security risk, and it was overlooked and overlooked and overlooked. And then the investigation that actually got him. And you could do the same thing, by the way, with Hansen, who just died. But I think these are good analytic work. Hansen's a less interesting story because he was basically turned over to them by a defector. But Rick Ames was missed by one group of people that should have caught him, and then caught by a different group who were not initially listened to. Query whether the
yeah.
fact that they were female has a lot to do with that. Bye,
Bye,
Alicia.
Alicia. Oh, bless you. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say two things. So the the Aldrich Ames story, there is a show called The Assets that is not bad at depicting it, but unfortunately it's very low budget and it got cancelled but they did finish the story, but it kind of got cancelled, so it's not very well known. But I do recommend it. It's quite a good show. But the interesting thing about Robert Hansen, so I recently interviewed Eric O'Neill, and there was one little thing that kind of came up. When Robert was a very junior FBI person, he realized quite quickly that he couldn't afford to kind of keep up with the DC lifestyle and get the connections he needed to rise up the ranks, and a kind of resentment built from there. And I think there's a rather interesting kind of socio-economic thing with that story, plus his fantasies of wanting to be James Bond, because he was apparently really obsessed with the James Bond stories.
Yes, and he actually spied early in his career, and his wife kind of knew about it and sort of made him promise not to do it again. It's the whole Hansen story is mega weird. And interestingly, unlike Rick Ames, who the motive was very clearly money, it remains, unclear even after Hansen's cooperation. I mean, the internal investigation, produced a kind of a mystery as to what his motives were. It sort of seemed to be that he was, a narcissistic sociopath and nothing like. But the answer wasn't ideological. It wasn't ultimately money. He didn't spend a lot of the money that he got. I mean, it's just a very weird story in a lot of ways. But bad choices make better movies.
Yes.
So I want to go back to your podcast, which I confess I had never heard of until you met up with Alicia the other day in the UK, and I'm curious whether that's because there's some like it's been kind of it's like I think of myself as pretty plugged in on the serious material in this field, and this has been going on for 8 or 9 years, and I didn't know about it. And so I'm curious: is it itself a secret? Is it and did it just slip through my radar? Uh, what should I take to be the reason that is it only known among the particular cognoscenti?
Well,
What should I
yes,
make of this?
you've joined the club, but no, you've joined our secret corner of the internet. Actually, that's the mystery for us too. I mean, there are definitely marketing 101 things we could do between Matt and I.
It's
We
grown a
run the
lot in recent
podcast.
years, though.
Yeah,
Like a
it has
lot.
grown.
So
It
Yeah.
has grown. Mm.
what's the average uh, penetration of a given episode? How many downloads or
Yeah,
listeners are you getting?
per episode, somewhere between sort of 5 to 7,000 per month. Is about 40 to 45,000. So we're doing, and it's definitely grown. I think the previous year it was in the sort of 30,000 a month range and things. So we're definitely in a upward swing. We've taken YouTube a lot more seriously recently, but as you've probably seen, our stats on YouTube are still very low. I think because the format itself probably plays a little bit against the YouTube algorithm until enough people watch it all the way through. The YouTube algorithm kind of punishes you if people switch off after like 5 minutes. So we're still kind of working our way to strategizing how to improve on that. But yeah, it's still the sort of the big mystery. In some ways, it's kind of fun that we're this weird little corner of the internet, and in some ways, it may have saved us from a lot of abuse. Hence why we had that disclaimer at the beginning, because when I started the show, it was of the era when people were getting no platform for speaking to anybody who was slightly dodgy, and because we have ambitions. Not only do we speak to intelligence officers and stuff, but we may one day get on a reformed terrorist or something to talk to us about their mindset, but we don't want people to think that we're endorsing that, if you know what I mean. So it's always this sort of delicate dance. So yeah, so why we're the best kept secret, I'm not sure, but we do one big revelation to both Matt and I last year. So we do yearly surveys with our audience, and we found out an awful lot of former intelligence community members are listening to our show, which was like, wow, they're listening to us. It was really quite flattering and amazing.
Pleasantly
I was really
surprised me a lot.
surprised.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's look, I cannot for folks for whom my endorsement means anything, I cannot recommend it highly enough. It's super high value content. It is also a pleasure to listen to. Um, I'm curious how this is an issue we struggle with in lawfare constantly, which is what are the parameters, the boundaries of our space? Like you guys, when we started, it was almost entirely about war on terrorism, law and policy issues. And then, the boundary keeps expanding, both because geopolitical events reminded us that, actually terrorism is not the only national security matter in the world, but also because certain domestic events, particularly the rise of Donald Trump, remind you that the great threat to democratic life in America might not be Al Qaeda, right? Might be our own executive branch. And so I'm curious, you're somewhat bounded by the name Secrets and Spies. You're more espionage based, but you also talk a lot about, what's going on in Ukraine, which is not primarily an espionage question. How do you define the jurisdictional boundaries of the podcast? What won't you treat?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, that one, isn't it? I'll just say my bit and I'll hand over to you, Matt. I think for us, we're always asking, is there some sort of national security component to it? So there are some sort of domestic, like one of the debates internally at the moment is about how we could maybe do something on ICE and what they're up to, and does it fit into our remit? Are we jumping the shark or not? Because I'd like to talk about it, but at the same time, is it really in our wheelhouse? It's a difficult thing to do. And then with the rise of the far right, and as you mentioned, Donald Trump and MAGA, we see that as a sort of national security threat, and it has led to terrorism or things that should be classed as terrorism. And so, yeah, if it sort of falls into terrorism, geopolitics, or espionage, we feel we can cover it. And then we have intrigue in our intro. So intrigue's that little get out of jail card, because sometimes you want to go in. I like in particular want to go into the mindset behind things. If anything, we probably never will fully know the full ins and outs of the secret world, but we might discover the mindset and the logic, and that might help us then fill in the blanks with things. That's sort of how I judge it. But Matt, how about yourself?
Well, I think we cover the name is Secrets and Spies, yes, but we cover geopolitics more broadly, So it's a lot of it's everything that sort of goes into that, right? I mean, so I always get, I'll see a review for a spy novel, so to speak, right? That says, oh, I really love this one. They kept all the politics out of it. And that never fails to trigger me because I think, what the hell do you think all this stuff is for? If not in service of nation states doing politics, So if you're going to talk about, why this office building is being broken into and secrets are being stolen out of this filing cabinet, or that's, probably a bit dated at this point, or being, hacked into, and this material being stolen, it ultimately boils down to political means. And I think if you just put horse blinders on to say, no, we're only going to talk about the act of stealing that information and not why and what it means and what it affects, you're not really telling the full story. And I think that's especially problematic when you decline to tell that full story because you're afraid that you'll upset certain people, And I think I'm not calling anyone out or anything, but there's parts where in this space, podcasts about these things, discussions about these things, people shy away from that stuff because they don't want to upset people. And that's something where, I don't know, we're not really going to do that. I mean, so Secrets and Spies is not a partisan podcast per se. I mean, Chris and I our political persuasions are both pretty normie center left. We make no secrets of that. But we do have a worldview, which is pro small d democracy and the post-war transatlantic order. We are unreservedly in favor of that. We are skeptical of far-right populism and all that it represents. And we're going to call balls and strikes, and we're going to talk about it. And so there's, we can't talk about geopolitics without talking about the president of the United States. Sometimes it's not possible.
Right. I couldn't agree more. Chris, you are also skeptical of left anti-militarism and anti-interventionism, and have made a few references to the filmmaking circles that you move in and the assumptions in them that, all military interventionism is merely an excuse for imperialism. I went to Oberlin College. This resonates with me as a sort of center left person who grew up in a kind of saturated left environment, and you often sort of feel like a right winger because you don't believe that, I don't know, supporting Ukraine is a stalking horse for U.S. imperialism or some such nonsense. The UK is a really interesting mix for this because you have a center-left government that's been stalwartly supportive of Ukraine. You also have a left tradition that is very mired in the nonsense that that I just described, including the Jeremy Corbyn wing of the Labour Party, but also the university environments in a lot of the country. Talk about the political nonsense of the left in this space. How much suspicion do you get for, taking seriously the idea that the UK and the US have legitimate intelligence interests.
Yeah, it's a tricky one to answer. I think I'll take it all the way back to a very good friend of mine was a refugee from the Bosnian War, and there's certain parts of the British left who believe that the Bosnian War and sort of, should we say, and the Kosovo War and any British or American intervention or lack of it in there is somehow that all those wars were just all made up by NATO to expand NATO. And, I take exception to that. And then with the war on terror, it's sort of become this sort of growing thing. And in fact, my first ever podcast interview on the show was with a lady called Meredith Tax about the problematic relationship between the Anglo-American left and the Islamic right. And I think that I don't know exactly where all of it comes from. I have my thoughts and stuff, but I think the problem on the left is they haven't really quite understood certain aspects of the war on terror. And they're happy to talk about anti-imperialism and talk about where we're, have been wrong, and we have, the Iraq War, etc., was not a good move. It's open to debate exactly what the motivations behind that were. I'm less convinced it's just about oil, but there are many people out there who are convinced it is. And then on top of that, I find it very problematic when you get people inviting people who are supportive of the Taliban or Al-Qaeda into universities to then talk to people, but then you deplatform Muslims who talk against Al-Qaeda and the Taliban because they come from that community and know about that. And that's been happening in the UK. I mean, it's happened maybe less so, we talk about it less, but I mean, what was the worst thing I ever heard was so it's been obviously the Syrian civil war. There's been a lot of back and forth about whether we should or shouldn't intervene. And there was a debate in Parliament about 5 years ago organised by a leftist group. And they apparently, there were a couple of Syrians who came in who wanted the West to do something to save their country. They thought that the West were the only people who had the, should we say, the ability and the manpower to possibly topple Assad. And they wanted to kind of give that view on the ground and say, look, our people are dying. We need the West to come in and do something. And they got shut down and removed. And these actual Syrians have got removed from parliamentary debate. So something isn't quite right on the left. But at the same time, you've got to be careful about sort of rampant militarism, etc. It's good to have a degree of caution because we shouldn't be just entering endless conflicts, and especially conflicts without clear goals. But I think also we can't blame everything on imperialism either. And I think maybe this comes from that kind of, I call it late 90s thinking. It's one of my big terms. If you have a drinking game on the podcast, I'm sure we could get drunk listening to me bringing this up. We've had an interesting kind of shift because in the 90s, we felt like the Cold War was over, nuclear threats over, and suddenly I think all of our commentary turned inward and we looked inward at our own demons, and we have not really, a lot of us are not able to understand that we're not the only problem in the world. And I think that's where the left's got a bit caught up, especially now. I feel that way. But then again, it could be just this is the sort of debates that get amplified on the internet, which gives us a false perception that this is what everybody's talking about. But that's sort of my 10 pennies worth. I hope that makes sense.
What do you think, Matt? Obviously, the American left and the British left are quite different from one another, and there is no prospect of. There's no American Jeremy Corbyn who is plausibly the leader of the main opposition party, and even the Americans who occupy that philosophical space, whether you think it's Bernie Sanders or AOC or something, don't have the same ferocity about it as, but we're not without some, particularly on campuses, similar moods. Where do you see the left's sort of anti-militarism, anti-intelligence function, certainly anti-covert action or suspicion of all things reflective of government power fitting into the conversation?
I think a lot of it, and this is a tough answer to thread because I don't want it to sound condescending in some way. I think In some cases, there's a lot of horseshoe theory at play with the American left, especially when you get into those sort of cases. There's also a
Particularly
lot.
when you're talking about Tulsi Gabbard, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, perfect. Demonstrate Exhibit A, horseshoe theory. Director of National Intelligence. God help us all. But I think that sector of the American left, I think there's a lot of just kind of simplistic, overly moralistic understanding of international relations and why things are the way they are. Well, there's more of a focus on how things should be and ought to be. Why isn't it like this, rather than acknowledging the world for how it is and seeking to deal with it in the moment, right? Incremental change rather than just sort of demanding that someone in power wave a magic wand and sort of like fix it, right? I think in a lot of cases, not all of them, the American left fundamentally means well. They want well. They want good things for people in the US and the world. But the way it sort of comes about gets to be half measures and kind of self-destructive. Yeah, and that's where the kind of horseshoe theory comes from. I think it's born oftentimes as a lot of naivety. But there's also, I don't think the far left in America, I think there's no chance of it ever coming to power the way that the far right has, because they just fundamentally suck at organizing. They can never really kind of get out of their own way. They're always concerned with self-policing, or you're holding the sword beside me, but I don't like how you're holding the sword, so we're going to argue about that rather than sort of facing our more common enemy or threats. There's a lot of that going on, so they're never the American far left will never attain power the way that the far right has.
No, I agree with that. On the other hand, if you're running say a publication in my case, or a podcast in your case, about intelligence matters, you're always engaged with the left critique, which is a suspicion of government power in general, U.S. power in particular, combined with a weird tolerance for much more malign activities conducted by adversary states. A tendency to overlook malign Russian and Chinese activity, and to underestimate the magnitude of the threats that the United States faces. And so you're kind of constantly engaged in this question of how much do you argue with it? How much do you, I mean, in my experience in talking about Ukraine, you don't have to spend a lot of time dealing with the tankies. They're not politically salient enough. You have to spend all your time dealing with MAGA. But if you're trying to defend 702, or which keeps coming up for reauthorization every 2 years, the principal critique is a left critique, and it's a left civil libertarian critique, and you find yourself engaging constantly with these arguments about whether we should think of FBI and NSA in particular as the old Cold War civil liberties violators, or whether we should think of them as important assets in a democracy's struggle for self-preservation. And I do think in that context, and in a lot of contexts like that, you're sort of constantly, the left has much more argumentative strength than it does political power.
And if anything, that's become harder a little bit with the George Floyd killing, and the kind of the anti-police sentiment as well doesn't help the FBI. And I think that, I don't know, not that the FBI are involved in that, but I think then the problem is people take the anti-police thing and think, well, law enforcement's bad, etc. There's a lot of leftist politics podcasts that either I or my wife listen to, and quite a few of them just make a lot of meal out of the anti-police sentiment and direct it at the FBI, and
or
also
at the intelligence community,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
definitely,
the FBI, look, it's heading in a very bad direction right now, but not because of its authorities. It's heading in a very bad direction because its leadership is choosing to take it in a very bad direction. But look, if you look at the arguments that were made in 2016 by left civil libertarians about the dangers to civil liberties if Trump were to win, they all got it completely wrong. They were all worried about, I'm literally not making this up, domestic drone strikes. They were worried about, would the NSA spying capabilities be directed domestically, right? All of these fantasies that were uh, pretty obviously fantastical, and they completely missed the big picture, which was, and I say this as somebody who didn't miss it, but was arguing with them. The main thing you got to worry about is not these esoteric covert action programs. It's the normal enforcement powers of the Justice Department, right? Because if you put an attorney general in there who wants to go after the president's political enemies, there's very little that stops that. Whereas NSA has this fabric of laws and regulations. It has day-to-day court oversight. It's very hard to do anything with NSA without getting caught really fast. And
yeah,
I think we really, one of the things that the left is very good at is influencing the cultural imagination. And one of the problems with these very conspiratorial uh, spy thrillers and is that they never pause over what the legal authorities are, and so they have this idea that these guys with guns and all these snazzy gadgets can do whatever they want, and they miss the fact that the people who really can do whatever they want are assistant United States attorneys with you know their powerful political bosses. And so I think there is a pernicious side to the left conspiracy theories here. I find myself in sort of tactical alliance with the left right now because the menace from Trump is so extreme. But I do think it's a dangerous thought loop that they've gotten themselves into over, 50, 60 years, and they need to think their way out of it. I just noticed the time, which has flown by. We need to wrap up. Chris Carr, Matt Fulton, you're great Americans and Brits, and it's great to meet you properly. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you
and
so
it's been a
much.
great chat, and I'd love to continue this conversation because it's definitely singing to my heartstrings there. But we'll continue this another time, hopefully.
Yeah.
Well, you both now have the magic code, which is a link that jumps into the studio. We are live every day at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. And one of the things about being a guest on Dogshirt TV is you are welcome back anytime with or without pre announcement. You can just hop in. The audience is entitled to interrupt at any time. And prior guests are invited back at any and all times. So do join us again.
Thank you, and I'll program the cactus accordingly next time.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. We'll have to have you over on our side of Riverside.
Long overdue. Yeah, we must. Yeah.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Take it easy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.